If you like learning about the obscure history of the NFL on Jaguar Gator 9, then you're really going to like what's taking place on the all-new channel Jaguar Gator 8, where we talk all things college football. The first official published video coming 2 weeks from now on Monday, February 21st. And now, on with our feature presentation. It's amazing how sometimes, all it takes is one game to completely turn around a career. A player can be on the verge of being cut, or a player can be so unhappy that he wants to leave town and never wants to play for that team again. And then, after 60 minutes on the field on Sunday, it's like those problems never existed, and everything changed for the better. And in the aftermath of Paul Brown's retirement as the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, there was a lot of dysfunction, to the point where they were in danger of losing one of their most prolific players. And one game changed all of that. This is running back Archie Griffin. In 1978, he was absolutely furious with his role with the team. When you combine the constant losing with the confusing game plan of head coach Homer Rice when it came to utilizing the former first-round pick's talents, he was done with Cincinnati. Despite being born in Ohio, playing high school football in Ohio, playing college football in Ohio, and still being in Ohio with the Bengals, he was this close to calling it quits, demanding a trade, and wanting out of Cincinnati. And one game completely changed everything, purely because of a hunch that the head coach had. And this is the story behind the game that saved Archie Griffin's NFL career. Before I talk about the game in question, we need some context to understand just how good Archie Griffin was, how prolific of a player he was, and why he was unhappy with his current situation in Cincinnati and wanted to catch the first plane out. If you know Archie Griffin, odds are it's not for his time in the NFL. Rather, it's for what you're watching right now, which is the incredible college career that he had. Many people consider Archie Griffin to be the greatest college football player of all time, and at the very least, he's one of them. And honestly, if you had Archie Griffin ranked number 1 all time from a college football standpoint, you probably wouldn't get a whole lot of arguments, because while Archie Griffin was at Ohio State, he was nothing short of dominant. The Heisman Trophy has been awarded every year since 1935, being given out 87 times since its inception. Archie Griffin is the only player ever to win this award twice, winning it in back-to-back years in 1974 and 1975. He had an astonishing 31 consecutive games where he ran for over 1,000 yards, and by the time his career with the Buckeyes ended, he had 5,589 rushing yards on 6 yards per carry and 26 rushing touchdowns. He's the all-time leader in rushing yards in Ohio State history, is inside the top 10 all-time in rushing yards, and by the time his career ended in 1975, he was the all-time leader in NCAA history in that category, with no other player even having as many as 5,000 yards. And he was an instrumental part of the success that Ohio State had during this time, as all 4 years that he was on the team, the Buckeyes won the Big Ten and made it to the Rose Bowl, even finishing the season undefeated. You name an award, he's got it. College Football Hall of Fame? Check. His jersey number retired? Check. Walter Camp Award? Check. Big Ten MVP? Check. I would be here all day if I listed every single accolade he won, because he was that much of a beast on the college scene. And when the 1976 NFL Draft rolled around and Griffin was looking to continue playing football at the next level, he didn't have to go very far. Cincinnati's rushing attack was not the best in 1975. They finished 17th out of 26 teams in rushing yards and 23rd out of 26 teams in yards per carry. On top of that, only one player on the team averaged more than 4 yards per carry, and Boobie Clark was the only player on the Bengals to run for more than 400 yards. That was a problem, since Clark was the leading rusher and only finished the season with 594 yards, ranking 29th in the league with 26 teams. Additionally, their struggles in the ground game were a big reason why they lost to the Oakland Raiders in the divisional round, as it got outgained 173-97 in rushing yards. With that in mind, the Bengals used one of their first-round picks on the college football legend, taking him 24th overall. It seemed like it had the potential to be a match made in heaven. Instead, it was anything but that. There's no good way to sugarcoat it. The start to the Archie Griffin era in Cincinnati was pretty rough. It was rough on the field, where the Bengals missed the playoffs in 1976 and 1977. And it was rough for Griffin, as he did not score a single touchdown during the 1977 season, despite playing all 14 games and starting 11 of them. In fact, through his first 2 seasons, Griffin only had 3 touchdowns. Now, by no means was Griffin a bad player, and I'd hesitate pretty strongly to call him a bust, because he definitely showed flashes in the league. But especially after the lofty expectations people had for him coming out of college, he struggled pretty heavily to live up to those on the stat sheet at the next level. And if the first 2 seasons were relatively rough, the 1978 season was looking like an even bigger train wreck. At least the Bengals, even though they missed the playoffs in Griffin's first 2 years, were competent and had a winning record both years. The same could not be said about 1978, when the Bengals replaced head coach Bill Johnson with Homer Rice following an abysmal 0-5 start, and when they started the season 1-12 through their first 13 weeks. Not only did they have the worst record in football, and not only did they have the third worst point differential in football, but they had a lethargic offense that had scored just 147 points, coming out to an average of 11.3 points per game. But the most frustrating thing for Archie Griffin was that he wasn't contributing to the Bengals on the field. Not necessarily because he was struggling, but because he just couldn't find his way on the field. Over the first 13 games of the season, Griffin had run with the ball just 83 times, coming out to an average of just over 6 times per game. Remember that Griffin was a workhorse at Ohio State. He holds the school record for most career carries with 924, and at the time of his graduation, he held the all-time NCAA record for most career rushing attempts. And here he was in the NFL, getting the ball maybe 3 times a half on average. He had yet to score a rushing touchdown all season, and in a 4-game stretch from weeks 9 through 12, he carried the ball just 2 times. Griffin was very vocal about his frustration with his lack of usage. At one point, he said on head coach Homer Rice and the way he utilized him, "How can I think about 1,000-yard seasons when I don't carry the ball nearly enough to do it?" With that, Griffin was thinking to himself one thing, and one thing only: get me out of here. In no uncertain terms, Archie Griffin did not want to be a Bengal anymore. His spirits were destroyed after sitting on the bench for a losing team that was being completely mismanaged, and he was pretty vocal about this. Earlier in November, he said that he had no idea why Homer Rice didn't play him. When a reporter told him that it was because, according to Rice, he wanted to rest him, Griffin said, "I like to play ball. It's kind of hard to accept. I don't want to say anything derogatory in the paper, but if they were trying to rest me, they should have rested me during practice last week." And just days before the Week 14 game, when talking about his role on the bench, Griffin said, "I really don't like it. I never know if I'm playing or not. I don't expect them to tell me anymore. When I didn't play at all in the Houston game, it really got to me. It was one of those valleys you get into." Griffin's plan was simple. After the Bengals played the Atlanta Falcons in Week 14, he was going to walk into owner Paul Brown's office and into executive Mike Brown's office and request a trade, expressing a desire to no longer play in Cincinnati and expressing a desire to go somewhere else where he would actually have a chance to contribute and see the field. And nothing during the week changed Griffin's mind. He was still buried on the depth chart behind the likes of Pete Johnson and second-round pick Deacon Turner, and was not expecting whatsoever to play in this game. As a side note, if you want to learn more about Pete Johnson and his career, click the card in the upper right corner. However, just minutes before the game was set to start, with Griffin dead set on this being the last time he ever suited up in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform, head coach Homer Rice had a bizarre announcement to make. Because in the locker room right before the Bengals were set to step onto the field, Archie Griffin was informed that he was now the starter. Now, longtime viewers of the channel and diehard Bengal historians and fans might realize that this was not exactly the first time that a Bengal was informed 15 minutes beforehand that he was set to start, as this happened to quarterback John Reeves prior to a 1975 game against the Houston Oilers. And that worked out surprisingly well, as Reeves played the best game of his career. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But with Reeves, it was because quarterback Ken Anderson wasn't healthy enough to go. With Griffin, it had nothing to do with injuries or disciplinary action. Homer Rice just had a hunch. Feels weird at this level that decisions are being made at the last minute with a hunch, but this hunch benefited Archie Griffin, as now he was going to be starting and playing a lot against the Falcons, a team that was 8-5 and was right in the thick of things for their first playoff appearance in franchise history, and a team with a dominant defense that was top 5 in the league in points allowed and hadn't allowed more than 17 points in either of their last 7 games, allowing just 11.6 points per game in that stretch. But this was Archie Griffin's chance to finally prove himself, and he did just that. December 3rd, 1978. We're at Riverfront Stadium for this interconference matchup between the one-win Bengals and the Falcons, in a game where the main storyline was the fact that Archie Griffin, after mysteriously being on the bench for most of the season, was going to be getting the bulk of the reps. And to say that Griffin played well in this game would be a massive understatement. First off, the Bengals stunned a ton of people by not only winning this game, but by blowing out the Falcons. Again, the Bengals had nothing to play for as the worst team in football, while the Falcons were fighting for their playoff lives. And yet the Bengals, the team with the worst offensive football going up against the top 5 defensive football, demolished the Falcons by a final score of 37-7, completely having their way by scoring 34 unanswered from the middle of the second quarter on. And while there were a lot of reasons why the Bengals ultimately prevailed and won this game, perhaps the big one was Homer Rice's hunch where he started Archie Griffin. Because in this game, Archie Griffin balled out and then some. He showcased his abilities as a passer, throwing a beautiful 18-yard pass to Jim Corbett at one point. But for the most part, he showcased his abilities as a runner, and ran the ball 16 times for 87 yards, averaging over 5.4 yards per carry. For some perspective on how good this game was, this was the most rushing yards he had in a game all season. Here's a graph showing all of his rushing yardage outputs from the 1978 season prior to this game. And as you can see, the game against the Falcons blew everything out of the water. It was easily his best game of the season, and quite possibly the best game he had since he was a rookie back in 1976. And after the game, all the talk was about Griffin's sudden increase in playing time, considering the fact that he had 16 carries in this game and just 8 carries in the previous 5 games combined. Maybe it was the emotional high of the win, or the fact that now, the Bengals coaching staff had a newfound confidence in their former first-round pick, but Griffin was suddenly happy in Cincinnati, and the trade plan was completely out the window. Even though he said that he considered the trade request, he said that he was no longer going to do that after this performance. As Griffin said, "I felt they had lost confidence in me, and this was a new chance for me." Turns out, this was the game that saved Griffin's NFL career, and at the very least, his career with the Cincinnati Bengals, because he spent quite some time after that donning the orange and black. Griffin got an increased workload over the final 2 weeks of the season, and the Bengals shocked a lot of people after a 1-12 start by winning their final 3 games. After getting 16 carries against the Falcons, Griffin got 16 carries for 64 yards in a Week 15 win against the Los Angeles Rams, and got 17 carries for 65 yards in a Week 16 demolition win over the Cleveland Browns. Griffin had just 268 rushing yards over the first 13 weeks of the 1978 season. Over the final 3 weeks, he had 216, and if he kept up that pace throughout a full 16-game season, he would have averaged over 4.4 yards per carry and would have had over 1,200 rushing yards. Griffin's confidence was back, the Bengals believing Griffin was back, and while I don't want to go as far as saying that Griffin was now a happy camper, he was no longer desiring to get out of Cincinnati. Griffin wound up playing 4 more seasons with the Bengals and would stay with the team until 1982. By the time his career ended in the NFL, with all 7 of those years being spent in Cincinnati, he finished with 2,808 rushing yards, 1,607 receiving yards, 4,415 yards from scrimmage, and 13 touchdowns, including a critical fourth-quarter touchdown in a 1981 game against the New York Jets to give the Bengals the lead. Are those numbers great for a first-round pick? No. However, Griffin had his moments, and showed that he belonged in the league. And anytime you're a running back and you're lasting nearly a decade in the NFL, especially after running the ball roughly 1,000 times in college and taking an absolute beating, you did something right. But it's crazy how one hunch changed everything. If Homer Rice didn't have that hunch before the Falcons game in 1978, who knows how the career of Archie Griffin plays out? It seems like there would have been a bitter standoff and feud between the two sides, and the odds that Griffin would have suited up for the Bengals afterwards, especially the following year in 1979, would have been slim to none. One game on a rainy day in Cincinnati changed everything. Because anytime a game is so influential that it makes you want to stay on the roster for another 4 years afterwards, it deserves to be remembered and deserves to be celebrated. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. If you want to see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.